everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 71 in the series. This one is pretty much Sweaterama with a little bit of other stuff thrown in. Since last I saw you on the podcast, which was a while, sorry about that. I had the yarn launch in between, but since last I saw you, I finished 3 sweaters. So yeah, I can tell you about 2 of them. One of them is a kind of secret test knit that will have to wait until spring, but it's finished and it's sitting in the closet and it's very beautiful. So I will be excited to tell you about that one later. So as I said, I'm coming to you from Urbana, Illinois, where I'm a professor at the university. Our semester's underway. We're about 3 weeks in. Things are going okay, and actually, things are going much better because the last time I podcasted, we had Tink the dog, who was in pretty much a doggy hospital at our house because she hurt herself badly in the backyard. She is since all sewn up, fixed up, back to playing, chasing tennis balls, wrestling with her sister. So she has a scar, and we've started calling her the dog who lived. And she looks a little bit like Harry Potter with the Voldemort, action. But she's doing great. So thank you all for your well wishes for her. And what else do I usually tell you? I usually tell you what I'm wearing. I'm wearing a shawl by Kefren Pritchett in honor of her being the designer for the Shorn yarn. This is Sand, which is a gorgeous triangular shawl that I knit up, oh my gosh, it must be 2 years ago now, maybe. And I did a funky mod on it as usual, which you could read about over on the blog if you're interested, but it is a gorgeous triangular shawl, all lace with this beautiful border, and I just love it. It's one of my favorite shawls. I knit it up in some Mad Tosh, and I wear it very often to school because it kind of dresses up a lot of outfits. So thanks for the awesome pattern, Kefren, once again. And Kefren, as I said, was the designer for the Shorn 2 traveling hat and mitts, which a lot of people have already caked up yarn for. I'm so excited. I keep getting little Ravelry messages and email messages that those of you who have gotten your yarn have already caked it up, and you're in the car knitting, or you're on the sofa knitting and streaming some TV shows or something. So thanks for letting me know. I really do want to know what you guys create with that yarn. So let's see, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about Shorn. I'll let you know how that's been going. I've got the 2 finished sweaters. One of them is the Rosenblom Genser, which we'll talk about. And the other is a Chimney Sweater that I knit for the elusive teenage boy who also lives in my house, but I don't often see. I've got some fun little bits and pieces of some Ravelry favorites, and some increasing in pattern, and some Q&A for me, and some giveaways, and some new podcasts, and lots of a smattering of good things. So Sweaterama Plus is what we're going to call this one, I guess. All right, so why don't we jump in with some knitting stuff, and then we'll get to the plus toward the end. You guys have seen this sweater for many moons now, many moons, and in fact you saw it in its other iteration where the white and purple were reversed. And I believe on the last podcast, on episode 70, I was talking to you about increasing in pattern for these sleeves, which kind of went well and kind of didn't go well, depending on how much of a perfectionist you are. So I opened up a Ravelry thread about increasing and decreasing in pattern because I thought, okay, you guys are all really good knitters. A lot of you have like way more experience, and collectively we have a lot of experience together. So I opened up this thread, and there were a couple of folks, Vera from the Netherlands, and Bente, yeah, from Norway, who's of the Arctic Crafts podcast. Both of those lovely ladies put up some extra info in there about how they do their increasing or decreasing in pattern, and it is like gold, people. You need to go over to that Ravelry group, the Knitting the Stash Ravelry group, and get in on that thread. So Bente talked a little bit about the way that she does mirrored increases or decreases, kind of like thinking about the way the pattern lays out and then adding a stitch at a time as she kind of increases. And she included photographs, which are really helpful, and they're on sleeves, so you can kind of get some info there. And Vera put up an amazing post where a couple of pictures where I actually couldn't see that the pattern was changing because she's so darn good at figuring out how to increase in pattern. I mean, if you look at the actual fabric that she created and put up in the photographs, it looks just like this. Like, it's like there would be no difference between this fabric and the fabric she has used to increase in pattern. It's amazing. And she uses this technique called a guide string. I think that's what she called it, where basically she'll have like a pin kind of tacked in the fabric where she's starting her increases, and it goes up like a, you know, like a triangle, and within that triangle she's kind of using that as a way to do these mirrored increases or decreases. It's incredible. Like, just looking at it, I want to just knit a few swatches now and then report back to you guys on how it goes, and I'd love it if anybody else wants to get involved in that. So we have the thread. Maybe that's where we can post our pictures and our learning and try to figure out whether or not we too can visualize increasing and decreasing in pattern, as our two guides have done. So thank you so much to both Vera and Bente for posting on the thread and for sharing your knowledge. And if anybody else wants to get in on it, head on over there, because it's incredible, and it makes me almost want to knit these sleeves for the 4th time, but not quite. So since I last talked about this sweater, basically I did 2 things. One is to set in the other sleeve, and the other is to finish up the neckline. Now, last time I talked about setting in the sleeve, I talked about some of the math that I tried. I talked about the math and the pattern. I talked about trying to figure it out 10 different ways from Sunday, and eventually just kind of going with the number of repeats of this little faux cable to kind of tell me how high I needed it to go and how much I needed to decrease. It was really just a visual kind of a thing for me. So I did the same thing on the other side, set in the sleeve, and I think I showed you the armpit last time. I love a good armpit. You guys know that about me. So beautiful armpit here, and this set-in worked really well. I didn't find any puckering anywhere around the back or the sides or the front. And one thing that I did do with this sweater that I don't think I mentioned before is that once I got out of the color work and up into the cables, I ended up going down a needle size because my gauge with the color work was a lot tighter than it was going to be for the cables. So I went down a needle size so that my gauge would stay relatively similar, and I think you'll be able to see, if you were to compare, say, the stitches that you see here with the stitches that you see here size-wise, you're going to see that that switch of the needles, which I did on the next sweater I'm going to talk about too, made a big difference in this construction. So I put the other sleeve in. I'm pretty happy with the way that came out. I'm happy with the gauge here. And then the neckline. So the neckline of this sweater was intended to have a zipper put into it. Now, I'm not a big zipper meets knitwear kind of person. Every zipper that I've ever encountered in knitwear is always lumpy, you know, and I know there are ways and solutions around that, but I'm just like a little averse to the whole idea. So I decided to just leave it as an open neckline for now. I thought maybe I'd put a couple of clasps in here, like those interlocking kind of clasp things, if I wanted to close it up, you know, maybe one here, one here, one here, something like that. But it looks pretty nice open, and I think it's still, this modification of leaving it like this still kind of captures the original, because in the original and most of the photographs it's open and you can barely see the zipper. So I did follow the pattern for the neckline in a way. I began by picking up stitches around the neck, and we talked about picking up stitches on a couple of episodes back, that, you know, you can kind of go with the number in the pattern, but you kind of just go your own way and figure out exactly what you need to do. So here along this front part, I picked up on this kind of slant, I picked up fewer stitches, and then along the back I picked up equally the number of stitches that were in the pattern up into the neckline. So I put the ribbing on, and in the pattern it calls for the ribbing to end with this, just like the sleeve has this really cool kind of rolled cuff. It calls for you to do all this ribbing and then roll the top of your collar. So I did that, and I put it on, and it looked like one of those clown sweater, like, you know when you, I don't even know, maybe this is like so old school, no one knows what a clown looks like anymore, with like one of those rolled neck things, but I put it on, I was like, man, I belong in a circus, this is not cool. So I pulled it, plus it was too high, so it sat way up here and it looked just like one of those like cuffed neck things. It was just bizarre. It was a bizarre look. I probably should have captured it in a photograph just to show you guys, but it wasn't so good. So I popped that out, I lowered the neckline, And part of me thinks the neckline should be just a titch higher, but I went with it. And the reason that I say it could be just a titch higher and I haven't fixed it is because once you finish this neckline, that's when you add these front pieces. So in order to fix the neckline, I would have to pull out all of the work on the front pieces as well as the neckline. Hi, Tink. You came in to visit. How are you? Yeah, Tink came in to visit. She might even lay down in here. So I put in these smaller edge pieces like it calls for in the pattern, and I tried to do my finishing work so that it wouldn't be too super visible, the pickups and the kind of weaving in of ends, and I'm pretty happy with the results. So overall, now that we're at the end of this project, and I went with this neckline, which I think matches the kind of ribbing that we've got at the bottom in a very basic kind of way, right? So it matches this ribbing and not the sleeve cuff ribbing. I think that's all right. So at the end of this whole project, I guess my review of this sweater is that it was an amazing experience to take a Norwegian sweater that was not written in English and to try to work through the whole thing and figure it out visually, to mess up like 15 times in huge ways. And if you want to know all of the ways I messed up, definitely go back a couple of episodes, because there were some doozies there. I have a sweater pillow to prove it. But in the end, I was able to salvage enough of the yarn in the same color lot, and I was able to make some decisions about the neckline and set those sleeves in and knit them from the bottom up and do the whole thing as it was meant to be done. So huge learning experience, really fun. And this is for our Knits in Translation cowl, which is still ongoing in the group. We're gonna do a kind of mid-cowl prize draw. So if you are interested in doing a knit in translation and you're working on one or you've just finished one, go over to the Ravelry group, pop it in the thread, show us a finished photo, and tell us a little bit about your story. And I will do a draw on February 15th for a winner for mid-cowl on this Knits in Translation. And the prize is going to be a beautiful bag from the Cocoon Tree. This is Lorna Lancaster. We did a big, huge giveaway from Lorna a couple episodes back, but this is one of her smaller triangular bags, perfect for like little projects like shawls or socks or something like that. And this will be the prize for the mid-cowl celebration. So if you've got a finished object over in the Ravelry thread, or even if you don't, go put one in there now, tell us a little bit about the story, and you'll be entered to win this really awesome project bag. We'll do another drawing when the cowl is finished, which will be way off in October 2020. So if you are inspired now to go and try to knit a pattern that's in a language other than your own, and it could be in English, if English is not your first language, then head on over to the thread, get involved. There's plenty of time between now and October to knit even a sweater if you want to, or to knit something smaller. That's absolutely fine. And I will do another, at least one, maybe two more draws for prizes along the way. So get into Knits in Translation, try something new, mess up, it's okay, you can fail, and then you can get advice in the thread and you can come back and tell us what you made. Okay, I'm gonna do a sweater swap out to show you my other finished sweater, and I'll be right back. And we're back. All right, my other finished object, as I said, is another sweater. I have not been idle, let's say, in these last few weeks. So this is the Chimney Sweater, and it is by Strikelisa or Elisabeth, who is also Norwegian. We're in a Norwegian kind of theme here. And I actually saw a version of this sweater up on Emily's Arctic Knitting podcast, actually on her Instagram feed, and I was like, that is a cute sweater. And I have a teenager who came home, I think I told you on the last episode, and was like, Mom, can you make me some socks? And then when we were gonna go on the ski trip, he's like, yeah, my friend has this homemade sweater. Do you think you could knit me one? And I was like, yes, of course I can, right? So I wanted to find a sweater that would be teenage cool, easy to knit, and something I could take with me for the ski trip, which was a couple weeks ago, which I survived. I'm here. There were 80 teenagers skiing on the slopes. We had some injuries, we had some craziness. Maybe I'll tell you about that in the life segment at the end. Anyway, so on the bus, which was 18 hours from Illinois to Colorado, 18 hours there, 18 hours back, I wanted some serious knitting to keep me busy and keep me occupied away from the teenagers behind me. So this sweater just seemed absolutely perfect. It has a lot of really neat kind of sweatshirt elements, which I thought would appeal to my 15-year-old. And actually most of the finished projects that you see up on the page for the pattern are for men or boys. There's also a really great version that was knit by, I can't think of her name right now, but I'll put it down here. She has a project page where she was knitting it for her son, I think, but it's all in one color and she looks awesome in it. So that makes me think I need to knit a version for myself, which I gotta get on pretty soon. So Chimney Sweater is cool because it has this, and I think this is partially why it's called the Chimney Sweater. It has this neckline that is very sweatshirt-like. So it's kind of like a raised neckline, and it has a pocket in here where you add this I-cord at the end, so you can snug it up if you want to. But you see how it kind of sits, like just raised just a little bit there. So it's not a full hoodie, but it has the kind of like look of a hoodie, and you can like pull these tight if you wanted to tighten up that top neck thing. So I thought that would appeal to him. It's also got this double two-tone color thing going on, and I checked with him on the colors and he said like a dark kind of bluey green and a gray would be okay with him. So I kind of went on instinct on this one and took it on the bus with me and knit it, and somehow it magically worked because by the time I finished it and my son came back from visiting his dad, I put it on his bed all folded up, and he just ran his room. He's like, the sweater arrived, kind of like, you know, a teenager would be like, my clothes came in from Supreme or whatever. So it was almost like the magic of the sweater fairy, you know, like the postman delivered the sweater to him somehow. He put it right on, and he went straight to soccer practice in it with all of his friends around and everything. And so I was just like, oh, nailed that one, nailed it. And if I'm given permission from the elusive teenager, I managed to snap like one photo of him in it so far. Like I said, they're kind of like creatures of the dark. You just have to find them at the right moment when they're not doing homework and sports and hanging out with their friends and are willing to like put on clothing and model for you. It's very, for those of you who don't have teenagers, they're almost like a different being, like a different kind of species or something. So I have one photo of him in the sweater, and if he gives me permission, I will put it up here so you can see him in it. In the meantime, I did for the podcast, I had to go into his room, pull it out of like wadded up in his closet, which, you know, and of course it's, you know, he's worn it to soccer practice. It's kind of, you know, just, it's become part of him, which is absolutely fine with me. And the good thing about wool, for those of you who don't know, is that it's like, it doesn't absorb any of that kind of stuff. It doesn't get like, if you put it on when you're sweaty, it's not gonna get smelly. It just has all of these wonderful properties that keep it cool and clean and not smelly, even if you give it to a teenage boy, which is pretty much the ultimate thing you could give a teenage boy, is like a sweater that won't get smelly. Now, a couple of things about this sweater that I will tell you guys. Number one is it is easy to knit. It is almost all stockinette, with the exception of a little bit of purling and turning and picking up stitches for this upper part. That's the trickiest part of the sweater. Otherwise, it is a very simple, straight up, top down knit. And you do your increases, once you make your chimney, you do your increases like raglan style for your shoulders. And then once you're done with your increases, you pop your stitches off for your armpits, you switch colors, and you just keep going straight down to basic kind of 2x2 ribbing. So even if you're a new knitter, this is absolutely a sweater you can make. I cranked this thing out, like I said, on the bus trip, so I think in total it took me, because I couldn't knit during the ski trip, I think it took me 10 days. I think I could have finished the sweater in a week pretty easily without killing myself. It's also knit in a kind of large gauge, so a kind of Aran weight or a worsted weight yarn, so you make pretty good progress pretty fast with this sweater. Okay, a couple of things. Aside from the fact that my teenager liked the sweater, it's also a magic sweater for another reason, and that is I knit the top in some yarn that I dyed. This is some local to me Shetland that I dyed up to be this kind of bluey green kind of color. Originally it was this color, and I over-dyed it, so that turned out pretty good. But the other magical thing about this sweater is that the second half is knit in Naturally Nazareth yarn in this Moonlight Gray, which I also used for my Phoenix sweater, my design that I came out with for the Better Sweater series last year. I had a skein or two left over, and I was like, that'll probably be enough, it'll be okay. And I started knitting and knitting and knitting, and then I knew I was gonna run out. So I went back to my supplier and I was like, oh no, I need another skein. But of course my supplier had put the yarn on sale and they had run out of Moonlight, and I was like, oh no, this is it. This is the moment when it becomes a 3-stripe sweater. So I ordered some more Moonlight from another store online and waited for it to come in, and I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll just rip back. Maybe I'll, intersperse the yarn so we can figure out the different color lots. This is gonna be messy. I get my yarn from the other yarn shop, and lo and behold, it is the same color lot. I know, right? I was just like, oh my God, I cannot believe this. Same dye lot, same dye lot. It's like impossible. 2 different stores. I'm halfway through the sweater, same dye lot. Amazing. So that's why I'm calling it a magic sweater. Not only did the teenager like it, but the yarn from 2 different stores came in the same dye lot, so that's pretty miraculous. All right, a couple technical things about this sweater that I would like to tell you. One is that I did a needle size change. So this yarn that I was telling you about, the Shetland that I used, I knew the gauge. I didn't even have to do a gauge swatch for the sweater, because this is the same yarn in a different color that I used for my Alias sweater. And so I measured the gauge on that sweater, happened to be the same needle size as was needed for this sweater. So I just cast on and off and running, right? And then I also switched needle size when I went to the Naturally Nazareth yarn, because the Naturally Nazareth yarn is not quite the same weight as this Shetland. The Shetland's more of an Aran weight. Naturally Nazareth is really a worsted weight. So I just went up 1 US needle size, and the gauge is like spot on. I'm not sure you can see it, but there's no puckering, there's no weirdness about this transition. It's just straight on, worked like a dream. So going up a needle size was really the way to go. And then other technical things, instead of, you'll often see in the project pages for this sweater that the chimney portion of this sweater is often a lot higher. And if you were to be knitting the chimney portion in a yarn like this Naturally Nazareth, it could go higher because it has a kind of better drape to it. You can see if I kind of pile this up, it does a nice drapey thing. This yarn doesn't drape. It's a little bit stiffer, and because of that, I only knit my chimney to be about, maybe 3-4 inches high. So it's much lower than what you might see in the project pages, but if you happen to substitute in a yarn that's got a little bit of stiffness to it, you don't need to make your chimney as high to get the same kind of sweatshirt effect. What else would I tell you about this sweater? Oh, the other thing I modified is that the pattern calls for you to make the change in color as you're picking up stitches for the armpit, and I just didn't want to do that. So I followed all the way through with the same color until I was done with the armpit area, and then I switched afterward. And that made it super easy to pick up stitches, because it was very easy to see the stitches that needed to be picked up. And I think it made for a nicer armpit, which I love, and it just made for a good transition. Now the color jog never happened because, and it would be back here, the color jog doesn't happen because I slipped a stitch and elongated that stitch right here so that it makes it look like it's a much more even line going across between the 2 colors when they did switch. So yeah, that is the chimney sweater, and Zach seems to love it. It's wadded up in his closet at the moment. He wore it to soccer. I'm pretty impressed as a mom who has always wanted to knit a sweater for a teenager, that he came home, asked for it, and then when he got it, he was like, this is cool. So I will take that as like a huge endorsement, and we'll leave it at that. Okay, as I said, I have one other sweater, but I can't talk to you about it because it's for a secret test knit. So you'll have to wait until about April for that one, I think. But those are my FOs, and the sweater on my needles, actually I have 3 sweaters that I've plans for right now. One is to make another version of this sweater for Spencer because he's kind of gotten into it. And I'm gonna do the same kind of thing. I've got this red Shetland that I dyed up. When I dyed the Shetland, I really went for it. I went for a purple for my alias. I have this beautiful kind of bluey green, and then this gorgeous kind of rusty red. So Spencer's gonna get a version of this with the rusty red, and I picked a different kind of gray for his lower part. It's a darker kind of gray, so I think it'll go really nicely with the red. So that's one sweater. The other sweater is, dun, da, 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 you guys talked me into it. I am gonna turn my cowl from Sweet Georgia into a sweater. So I bought the other Party of 5 pack and I've been working away on the body of it. So once I get a little more progress in there, I'm gonna do the math and figure out what I'm gonna do with the sleeves and the collar and all that kind of stuff when I get a free moment from my brain. So that's sweater number 2. And sweater number 3 is gonna be in my Shorn yarn that just came out. I saved myself a sweater quantity of this sweet stuff, and I am going to knit Geiger by Nora Gone. Now Geiger is a 5 out of 5 Brooklyn tweed pattern, like 5 out of 5 difficulty, and I like that. I like a challenge, you guys know that. It is a 30-page pattern. It is no joke. And I think it will look perfect with this yarn because it calls for a DK weight yarn that can do cables really well, and I think this is the yarn. And a light color like this will show off the cables really well. I saw a version of it in the project pages that I absolutely loved, done in a very similar kind of grayish color. So I'm gonna go for it. By the way, this is Shorn. You met it in the other Shorn yarn launch video. Many of you have it coming to you in the mail. If you don't, I have 12 skeins left. 12. So if you're interested in getting some more Shorn, or if you haven't gotten any yet, I have 12 skeins left. Send me an email. I'd be happy to send it from my stash to yours. All of the info is still over on the blog, and I'll leave that up for a couple more days, and then that'll be it for Shorn. And we'll have to wait for next year to see what happens. So there you have it. Okay, that's my 3 sweater plan. We'll see how it comes together. 3 sweaters done, 3 more sweaters planned. We'll see. Okay, so the next couple of segments are just kind of little bits and bobs, the Sweaterama Plus, as I promised. So the first thing is that I had an excellent conversation with Debbie, who's my guildmate and my spinning and knitting buddy, this past week. And we started kind of like pulling up favorites and showing each other little bits and pieces of things like, oh, I like the sweater, and oh, this hat is really cool. And it was in part because one of our guildmates was trying to decide on a 2-color hat. She has some Shorn yarn and she has some other white Shetland that she wanted to kind of combine and do a colorwork project for the first time. Or she's done colorwork, but she hasn't done a lot of stranded colorwork, so she wanted to practice it. So Debbie and I started looking for hats, and then we started showing each other our favorites. And I thought, you know, favorites are often something that we kind of keep to ourselves, with the exception of maybe the Make 9 or some of our aspirational photos that we might post on Instagram or something like that. We often keep our favorites to ourselves. And I thought, why not share them with the world? So what I want to do is open up a Ravelry thread and see if anybody else wants to share their favorites. Maybe it's, you know, the absolute sweater that they're hoping to make. Maybe it's just a couple cool patterns that you have in your queue, things that you're thinking about making, but I just want us to be able to share a little bit. I mean, I spend hours at night sometimes if I can't sleep on Ravelry, just like finding things, going really deep into the patterns and like finding older things or funky things or things that have an element that I really love and put them in my favorites, and then I sort them. And it's this very kind of solitary activity, but I'd love to just share that kind of stuff and develop a way to talk about our favorites and like sort them and figure out what we like and how to share them so that we can maybe build communities around them a little bit more. So if you're interested in sharing your favorites or seeing what other people have favorited or how they go about searching through patterns and things like that, head on over to the Ravelry group. I'll set up a thread for us and we can have a little chatter over there about what we do and what we like about our favorite things on Ravelry. Okay, then the other thing is, I was thinking, I talk a lot on this podcast about and specifics of knitting, technical stuff, design stuff, and you all seem to dig that. I hope that's the feedback I'm getting. But sometimes I get some questions about me or about my knitting process or like where I'm coming from or stuff like that. So I thought it might be nice if you all have any questions for me. Let me know what they are, and I'll do my best to have a little segment on the podcast where I answer do some Q&A. You know, maybe it's like how I learned to knit. Maybe it's something else that you're interested in, like what's it like to have had the sheep to turn into yarn, or how do you choose your sweaters, or like what is it that you look for, or I don't know, whatever it is, stuff about me, stuff about my knitting. If you have any of those kinds of questions, I'd be happy to try to answer some of them. So we'll do a little Q&A segment in the next podcast. And the last little thing on here before the giveaway announcement is that there are a couple new podcasts out there in the world that I'd like to just give a little shout out to. So the first one is Shanti Knits. And this is Chantal. She and I have known each other on Instagram for a little while now. She's test knit for me, and she's just been like a really nice, wonderful presence. She knits beautiful things. I've mentioned her on this podcast before. I've mentioned her Ravelry feed and her Instagram feed because it's just really quite inspirational. She does beautiful work. She knits lots of sweaters, which I absolutely love. So she started a podcast called Shanti Knits, and you can check it out on YouTube. She has a pilot episode up now. And she dyes yarn, she is a test knitter and a sample knitter, and she just has a cool eye for a lot of great colors and textures and things. So you can check out her new podcast. And then the other one is Nature's Cozy, and that's Allison. And Allison is actually here in town with me, and we are gonna meet up this weekend. So Allison, hello. I can't wait to see you. We're gonna go hit the coffee shops, bring some knitting, chat about whatever, and I'm excited to meet like a local to me podcaster. I think she has her second episode up. So go give her some love, show her some support. See if you like either of those podcasts and you wanna subscribe to them. I just know them both as people, and I like them quite a lot, so I thought I'd share them with you guys. All right, now for the giveaway. We've got a giveaway that I announced a couple weeks back. It's been a while. And this is for a beautiful print from Georgia Camden. And Georgia is a artist, graphic designer, and she put this beautiful artwork, I guess. I'm calling it a print. I don't know exactly what to call it otherwise because I'm totally not in the art world. But she put together this beautiful piece of art for the cover of a craft magazine, and she sent a copy for you guys. So I asked you all to go over to her site and see what you liked over there, and you had such nice things to say. Thank you for sharing all of that with me and with Georgia. So the winner of this print is Susie Parks. Susi Parks, I think. And I've notified you on YouTube, and maybe you can send me an email with your mailing address and I will get this in the post to you. And a huge thank you to Georgia Camden for sponsoring this giveaway and for making such beautiful art and for letting me send it out into the world. I really appreciate it. So, Georgia Camden giveaway, all done. And we do have a Shorn giveaway going on too. I'm gonna let that be open for another week or two if people are interested in getting in on that. And I'm actually gonna give away 2 skeins of Shorn. I thought I was gonna just give away 1, but I feel the love, and I think it would be good to get more Shorn out in the world. So if you wanna get in on the Shorn giveaway, you can go leave a note over on the yarn launch video, but you can also leave a note here and tell me what it is that you think you might knit with Shorn. How about that? That might be a fun question. Shorn is a 3-ply, DK weight, natural gray yarn, and you can make like a set of mitts out of just 1 skein or a hat, but tell me some of the patterns that you might be interested in. So I'd love to know what you guys might be knitting for it. And like I said, I've got 12 skeins left, so send me an email if you're interested in hooking yourself up with an extra skein of Shorn. All right, my friends, I think that is it for today. It has been lovely to hang out with you, to tell you about all the Sweaterama happenings, and I hope you have some inspiration in your lives, sending you off into the knitting and crafting world, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Take care.